Hello coaches, and welcome to this introduction to the 11 versus 11 formations and systems of play. My name's David Newbery. I'm the e-learning coordinator for United Soccer Coaches, and I'm joined by my colleague Ian Barker, Director of Coaching Education. Hello Ian.
Hello David, thank you for having me here.
Very good, Ian. So on the screen we see the outline of this course, a special topics diploma, and we have 6 presentations. The session we're doing today on introduction, and then 4 formation presentations. And then the final presentation in this series looks at the 4 formations in an opposed environment. The candidates will get 32 training plans, and those can be downloaded online. And at the completion of the course, we'll get the special topics diploma. On the screen, we'll see an agenda for the course. This is a course that really is designed for any coach working with 11v11 environment, but of course we will have coaches that are preparing to move from the 9v9 into the 11v11, and when they do, they may be working with youth players, high school players, college players, or of course adults. Ian, anything here that jumps out at you in terms of the agenda?
Yes, David, I think that all 9 of these considerations are critical for this presentation and the subsequent ones. The one that really jumps out to me, though, is number 3, the principles of play in the 11 versus 11 game. From my perspective, a coach must have a good grasp of the principles of play and be able to share those with his or her players in order to make the effective transition from the base formation into the ultimate system. And as we look now at the numbers to the right of the screen, we hopefully can establish that these add up to 11, and it seems like we've managed to achieve that. And what we look at is we look at typically 4 lines of a team. So in the case of the 1-4-4-2, a goalkeeper, a back 4, a midfield 4, and 2 strikers. However, in the modern game, we also have to be aware that coaches are now starting to implement possibly 5 lines to the team, representing greater depth and sophistication perhaps in the midfield line. However, these numbers adding up to 11 only tell us a very small part of the story. Basically our starting shape and our idea of what our shape should be as we build. What it doesn't tell us about, though, is the disposition of our opponent. It doesn't discuss how we might morph this shape when we're attacking or defending. It doesn't tell us about the types of strategies and tactics we would employ based on perhaps the scoreline, the time in the game. So this is a great starting point for our presentation and for subsequent discussions about formations, but we now need to look a little bit deeper as we progress into considerations of systems. When we look here at a 1-4-4-2, this is probably what we would see at the start of the game as the players line up for the kickoff. It will certainly tell us a little bit about functionality. So obviously our goalkeeper will be in a different color and probably positioned near the goal. Here we can see that we have employed 2 strikers. So we know this is a 4-4-2, at least from the coach's starting position. But from there, the ball will get rolled into play. Our team will have it, or our team will be out of possession areas of the field, and we'll see a whole series of different shapes morphing in and out and different concepts of that formation as the game unfolds. And we have here now a really nice slide that suggests the ball is indeed rolling, and this 4-4-2 has really morphed quite quickly into some different shapes. Our goalkeeper in possession has helped us further up the field. Our 2 centre-backs have been left at home in this particular interpretation, and our full-backs have pushed wider. So there's a number of different things going on based on the player's interpretation of the situations. And of course, we haven't even pictured in here the defenders yet. So this, for me, is a good start point as we understand how formations and shapes ultimately lead into systems. And from this point, I'll turn it over to David if you have any comments on this slide.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, one comment on this slide. I think it's really important. This is one of the things that is great about coaching, is that we can interpret this system in multiple different ways depending on the proclivities of the coach. One thing that I certainly would look at here is, does the coach like a more defensive or more attacking formation? Are they looking to play expansive or not to concede a goal? So these are some of the considerations that we will focus on when we start working on the system as it pertains to a particular group of players or the way that the coach sees the game.
And from my perspective, this slide is really important for us to understand. So within reason, any coach can suggest that he or she plays a series of numbers that add up to 11 and be able to say that, I have a goalkeeper, 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, and 2 strikers if I'm in a 1-4-4-2. But beyond that, the experienced coach and the effective coach is the one that can understand the considerations beyond the formation, as suggested here. So the why, when, where, and how, and then how that framework pertains to the individual abilities and group abilities of his or her players. And then, of course, what the disposition and the individual and collective abilities and strategies of the opponents are. So it's one thing to be able to say that we have a formation. And again, everybody can pretty much do that. But it's now explaining how that is deployed and employed is the key and the difference between the novice and the experienced coach.
So a question now begs to be answered, which is what determines which formations or systems that you use? And there's probably a couple of approaches. One is that the coach and the club determines the formations and systems in an structured environment. The club may want to prepare players to play the way of the highest level teams, either within their club or teams that they model themselves on from the professional game. Certainly it starts with the youngest players in the club and is developed through the small-sided games environment. Players are taught to play a system and they move around the field to find the right fit. The emphasis is on the players fitting into the system and not the other way around. And then, of course, the other way of looking at it is whether you determine the system and formations based on the player's talent. And that would be a situation, particularly when there's a new coach, when they take a team with players that they don't know very well. And this is one way to approach it, where they evaluate the talent and then select the formation and system around the talent of the players in the team. This is certainly a good strategy if the coach is not given a lot of time to develop a long-term approach, or if there's a high turnover of players and without a pipeline of familiar talent. So now we're going to go into an introduction to the numbering system, and I'm going to hand over at this point to Ian.
Thank you, David. The numbering system is very much in vogue right now, very much in fashion. It's endorsed by most of our major soccer organizations, both in this country and abroad. And I believe it helps coaches, and my feedback from coaches is the majority of them do find this helpful to understand. So regardless of whatever numbers the players wear on their back, the numbering system suggests their general position on the field. So quite clearly, number 1 refers to our goalkeeper, and number 9 refers to our primary striker. 7 and 11 would typically relate to our wide players on the wings, 11 being on the left, 7 on the right, in the advanced positions. So these are general considerations of who plays where. And so I can tell my young player or my player, you're going to play my number 9 today, you're going to play my number 3, which means you're probably in the left back position in some regard. What it doesn't say, however, is what are the technical proclivities, the physical proclivities of a certain player. So in the case of a number 9, it's quite a straightforward example. Is your number 9 diminutive but very fast, an excellent finisher? Or is your number 9 a big, strong player, more of a target hold-up player? Is your number 2 a very dour defender, stay-at-home kind of defender? Or are they somebody that likes to join in the attack? So the numbering system, again, is a great basis for us, but it has its own limitations in terms of really telling the full and true story. And so as we move forward, just again, 1 refers to our goalkeeper, 2 and 3, typically our wide defenders, 2 on the right, 3 on the left, and then 4 and 5 would typically be understood to be our centre backs in a normal orientation. Moving up into our midfield, or forward lines or advanced lines, 7 would be on the right, 11 would be on the left, 6 and 8 are typically in the centre of the park, and they may be staggered or set up in different ways depending on the coach's preference and the player's abilities. And then whereas number 9 will certainly be our most advanced player in the employment of the numbering system, number 10 could be side by side, or number 10 could be perhaps offset a little bit. But typically number 10 would be the first or secondary striker in most systems.
Now we're briefly going to talk about the principles of play, and Ian certainly introduced this when we talked about the agenda and the importance of the principles of play, and it's really critical for all coaches at every level of the game to appreciate the principles of play, both attacking and defending. The principles are the same whichever system or formation you select, and we should use these principles to guide our decisions when selecting formations and systems. And by teaching our players to understand the principles, we'll be in a better position than not. So Ian, would you like to just review these 5 principles of attack and defense with us?
Absolutely. So what we see on the screen is what I would consider the rubric that has been most commonly used in US soccer coaching education, and is most commonly known to those of us that have been through our coaching education programs. What's nice about these principles is that they line up across. So in this example, the player in possession should be looking to penetrate with the ball, be it on a dribble, a pass, or a shot, and of course, in some way hurt the opponent. Consequently, somebody on the opposing team has to get in front of the ball and apply pressure to deny the penetration. As we progress through these principles, the player in possession must receive help or support from perhaps the closest or one of the closest teammates. Consequently, the person that is applying the pressure, the primary defender, should have some sort of cover to try to create 2v1 situations. And then as we advance through the principles, the rest of the team in possession is looking to move and get wide, whilst the opposing players are looking to balance off the threat of the ball in space and try to make the field small. So these principles really dovetail really nicely. And then in the slightly more intangible, can we demonstrate in attack the ability for creativity, improvisation, and surprise? And then can the defense demonstrate that they have the ability to remain patient and disciplined as the situation demands? So the principles of play, both on attack and defense and how they dovetail, in my opinion, is absolutely critical as we move from formations into considerations of systems.
Now we're going to talk briefly about some of the advanced coaching methods that we would see taught on higher level courses, such as our national, advanced national and premier level coaching awards. But also it's important for coaches to understand that through time and experience, we should be developing our coaching methodology and our teaching methodology. So Ian, please, if you would, just talk briefly about some of the coaching methods and some of the toolboxes that the coach should be dipping into to improve their coaching in the 11v11 game.
Absolutely. So when we look at the left of the screen in terms of coaching methodology, these should be familiar to experienced coaches, and even the novice coach is probably employing many of these methods, but sometimes they're doing so unconsciously. So when I look at the first two, the progressive method would suggest the warm-up, small group, big group, final game activity, quite common to most of us. Whereas the whole part whole, or the play, practice, play, suggests that we start with a game, then we do training, and then we go back to the game. So different ways of getting to the topic in your session. And then function, where we talk about training an individual position or group. Phase is a methodology where we work on maybe 2/3 of the field. Pattern play or shadow play, where we work through different kind of set movements. And of course, in the final game, in the scrimmage, how are we coaching in that? Are we in the middle of the field, on the sideline? What type of interactions are we having? So some examples of methods. And then on the right, the coach's toolbox. Here are 5 different ways the coach can potentially influence the session. So in the first case, maybe coaching while the game is going on, so some talking over the top. Waiting until the ball has gone out of bounds, so a natural stoppage. The more traditional and commonly understood freeze methodology, where we stop the players in the middle of the action, make a correction and restart it. Sometimes addressing an individual player, be it during the activity or pulling them to one side and helping them. And then finally, manipulating the game conditions to bring out coaching points. So in this example, if we use 4 small goals instead of 2 big goals, we're maybe looking at defending different points of attack, maybe switching the point of attack in possession. So methodology and the coaching toolbox, critical for the effective coach to demonstrate their ability to move from a formation and lead the players into an understanding of a system.
Ian, in the final section of this presentation, we're going to briefly review some of those formations and systems that we would introduce 11v11 and a preview of the 4 sessions that we have coming up. So if you wouldn't mind, Ian, let's talk us through some of the attacking features of the 1-4-4-2 system.
Thank you, David. So 4-4-2 formation will actually be my chosen formation in a subsequent presentation. The 3 ideas here are not an always or never kind of proposition. They're not exclusive, but they're certainly something that you might want to consider if you decide to employ 4-4-2. And what I like about 4-4-2, if the 7 and the 11 are kept fairly wide in the field, is you create wide synergies between the 2 fullbacks, number 2 and number 3, and the 2 wide midfielders or attackers, 7 and 11. So there's one part of it. In the 4-4-2, we typically have good width and we have the ability to combine in the wide spaces. As we move forward, we would look here now at the importance of the 4 and the 5 as being the basis of perhaps our attacking possession. So even though they are deemed to be defenders, when we have possession, of course, they're part of our attacking unit. And the ability of 4 and 5 to play with their feet and even connect with number 1, the goalkeeper, will give the opportunity for 2 and 3 to take advantage of freedom as they move forward. And then finally, in the 4-4-2, what I like about this system is we have possession, and when we're in possession, is that if 7 and 11 can be encouraged to push on, and 9 and 10 are high as part of the way that we employ the formation, you can see we actually start to overload the attacking line, and there is great support in both wide positions and perhaps later on from 6 and 8. So in the 4-4-2 in possession, we can overload lines quite quickly as we move forward. Flipping to some potential defensive considerations, if the opponent is playing maybe 1 or 2 strikers, then it's for the 2 and the 3 to join up into the midfield line to put pressure in the midfield. So we can release players in a defensive mode when the other team has the ball, and maybe overload in the defensive lines higher up the field and still remain defensive integrity with 4 and 5 staying at home and perhaps one of the fullbacks. Another idea in the 4-4-2 where we deploy 7 and 11 wide, and we of course deploy 3 and 2 wide, is that we have excellent coverage across the field from east to west, as it were. So in this particular diagram, when the ball is over here on our right-hand side, we have our number 2 press up, and 3 and 4 and 5 will slide across. But the nice thing about the 4-4-2 is it does tend to blanket the field from a defensive starting point of view, and then allow us to morph it as the opponent demonstrates the ability to attack wide or centrally. And then finally, for a coach to consider, and it's just a consideration, is how do you want your 9 and 10 defending when the other team has the ball? So in this case, we're looking here at the number 9, applying pressure to the ball from the other side to create maybe little pockets of defensive pressure. One interpretation might be that you don't want your number 9 and number 10 wearing themselves out. So you may choose to leave them high and have very minimal defensive responsibility. So this again is for the coach to choose. But in this particular example, our number 9 and number 10 have stayed compact with the rest of the group and are also willing to apply pressure, albeit from the other side of the ball. So it's a great interpretation and a potential use of those 9 and 10.
Thanks, Ian. So my presentation on the formations, we'll be looking at the 1-3-5-2. And one of the things I like about this particular formation from an attacking context is the ability for us to commit extra players forward. So unlike the 4-4-2, where we had 4 players in the defense, now we've moved another player forward into the midfield, which is allowing us to push forward, particularly our wide players, our number 7 and 11, to get in high support to our central strikers. And one of the things you'll notice here in the numbering is that we have our central strikers both numbered as number 9, because functionally we want those to perform a very similar role. So if you look at the numbers we have on the field, the one number that is missing is the 5, and we've now added a second number 9. Another aspect of this formation that we like is the opportunity for the goalkeeper or defenders to distribute the ball quickly forward in high positions, whether that's wide or to our strikers. And because we have the coverage of defensive support with the 2, 4, 3, and number 6 playing quite narrow and centrally, it allows us to play the other players a little bit more expansive and take the risk going forward. And then finally, the third feature is the opportunity for us to play between the lines of the field of the opponent's defense and midfield. So if we had a defensive line here and a midfield line here, it's the ability for our number 8 and our number 10 to move between the lines of their defense and midfield to get into support behind the 2 number 9s to make combinations and then decide whether to penetrate through the middle or go around the edge with the number 7 and 11. Now we'll look at the defensive features of the 1-3-5-2, and the first diagram shows our ability to defend and organize ourselves defensively very quickly, particularly in a compact area around the center of the field. The number 2, the number 4, and the number 3 all remain narrow. So really the wide areas is our vulnerability and our ability for our number 7 and 11 to get back and cover. Our number 6 will drop back into a defensive shield in front of our back 3. Our number 10 and number 8 will recover centrally, and then that only leaves really the areas wide where there will be space for the opponent to attack. So looking at the area that we cover, unlike the 4-4-2 where we covered almost the entire width of the field, now in this system we most likely will be covering the area from the edge of each of the penalty box in a central position. That is shaded in blue here. So as you can see, only one player on our team is outside of that area, and that's the number 7 that is putting pressure on the ball in the left fullback position. And then finally, it gives us the opportunity, once we get our players in a defensive formation compact, to drop deeper, now to play delayed pressure and to trap our opponents. So in this system, one way to play it is to drop back, allow the goalkeeper to roll the ball out and distribute to our fullbacks or our wide midfield players. And as that ball is traveling, our forwards cut off the opportunity for a back pass, our wide player puts pressure on the ball, and then our central midfield players, in this case the number 10, will start to come out of the compact shape and start moving to trap their fullback or midfield player with the ball. Ian, let's talk about the 1-4-5-1.
Absolutely. So when we talk about a 1-4-5-1, the initial suggestion might be this is a very defensive type formation, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. So one of the highlights when we have the ball in the 4-5-1 is that we might push forward very aggressively in the wide positions and be allowed to do that because of the opportunity of one of the midfielders to stay home and protect our 2 centre backs. So in the 4-5-1, when we have the ball, it is an opportunity to maybe really commit significant numbers forward with the integrity of defence maintained, or transition to defence maintained by the number 6 player. Other highlights that I would be looking at very importantly in this type system is when we have the designated single striker and he or she is clear on who that role is, we do have a continual outlet pass. So once we've won the ball, all of the players on the team should be aware that the number 9 is our outlet option. And that could be a direct ball from a goalkeeper or a centre-back. It, of course, could be a developed passing sequence to get to that number 9. But having that number 9 in that central position on a consistent basis, and with them having a single responsibility, does give us a focal point for our attack at pretty much all the time. And then, as with all formations, as they become systems, we look at the different orientation and how that 4-5-1 can morph. So in this particular example, and it's just a potential example, is as we've got the ball, we've demonstrated the ability to push the fullbacks on, who have consequently pushed 7 and 11 on, and we've actually morphed our shape now into a 3-4-3, and it's one of the midfielders who has stayed behind and 2 of our quote-unquote defenders who have moved forward. So a really interesting ability to shift and morph your team depending on the way that you share this with your players in the 1-4-5-1. Defensively, we have some interesting type of opportunities here. So as we look to defend, the importance of the number 6 and how he or she helps the number 4 and number 5 is critical. But what we see in the modern game very often is that before we worry about number 2 and number 3 recovering, is that number 6 actually recovers and becomes our auxiliary centre-back or defender. And so sometimes we can keep as little as 2 or 3 players back and not require the 2 fullbacks to stay home, because they now receive their covering positions from the 4 and 5 centre-backs, as 6 allows them to free up. As we look with number 6 dropping in, the ability of number 6 to drop in allows 4 to push out, allows 5 to push out, and gives us potentially more coverage across the back line with 3 players and not requiring 4 or 5. So the ability of these players to operate independently and 6 to free them up again could really help us and allow us to keep players committed to the attacking position should we win the ball. And then finally, it's important that we work out the orientation of our midfield in the 4-5-1, particularly centrally. So in this case, we've demonstrated a 10 and an 8 high and a 6 deep. Of course, when we lose the ball, it's critical that 10 and 8 are willing to drop in to strengthen and thicken up the middle of the park in the 4-5-1. And then also we have the consideration of what do we do with the number 9. So once again, as in my previous 4-4-2 slides, we've demonstrated a desire that we want the number 9 to put some pressure in and drop back in and stay compact. It would be perfectly valid, however, to say to our number 9, just stay as high as you can and be the outlet. But in this particular case, we've stayed nice and compact, and our team started to morph into kind of a back line of 4 and a midfield of 5.
So Ian, our last system to review and preview is our 1-4-3-3 system, and we'll start with our attacking shape. And as you can see in this diagram here, with 3 players up top, we now have an opportunity to create the length in the team from goalkeeper to our strikers. And so this gives us plenty of opportunities, certainly to provide that permanent height for our team, which is certainly a much more attacking focused approach. The other key thing to consider here is when we do get the ball, if we have 3 players up top, our 7 playing more, certainly playing higher, but certainly on the right, our 11 playing more on the left, and our 9 playing more centrally, we have an opportunity to release the ball quickly and start quick counterattacks in high positions. And then the final point from an attacking feature perspective is our ability for our 3 players up top to stay relatively narrow, which will now allow us to provide width from our late arriving fullbacks. And anyone who's ever played in that position knows that the attention of the opponent defensively will often be on what is closest to goal. These players in this area in blue, which allows us to bring in players from our deep defensive positions up in support, hopefully in a lot of space. And now we'll talk about the defending features. And the first of those defending features is similarly to the options we had with the 4-4-2. Now we have the ability for us to cover almost the entire width of the field in the back line, which gives us a lot of security in the event that we lose possession of the ball. The second is our ability to allow our 4 and our 5 to stay very central in the central positions of the field to defend in front of our penalty box, and give us the ability for our number 6, who's slightly more deep lying in midfield, to provide coverage in the event that the number 2 and the number 3 have been involved in the attack and they are in a recovering position. So with that certainty of the 6 playing deeper, it allows our 2 and our 3 to feel more confident. But one thing about this system that we would want to consider is whether we send both fullbacks at the same time. And in all likelihood, if we were to send the 2 forward, we would want the 3 to remain and balance off the back 3 or the back 4 in the event that number 6 joins in. And then finally, the vulnerability of this system certainly is in wide positions in front of our back 4 with no real wide players up top or in midfield. We have this vulnerability, so it's really important for us that the number 7 and number 11 do provide some support on their side of the field to the fullback on our team. So that is really a summary of the 4 formations and those systems that develop from those formations. This is our interpretation, not a right or wrong interpretation. But in order to learn more, certainly it's important to listen in to the formation presentations that will follow this introduction. Ian, any concluding comments?
Absolutely. So I'm hopeful that this taste of how we might consider the formation becoming a system is intriguing. And as David said, we'll certainly review in much greater depth with corresponding training plans and activities at least 4 of these formations and how they become systems. When I consider here the quote from John Bloom, I think he's really captured the essence of what this presentation and series of presentations is designed for. That is to say, again, as coaches, we can all spit out some numbers, and when you add them up, they come to 11. But now what I'd like coaches to think about doing is, I play a 1-4-4-2 because, and I play a 1-4-4-2, whatever the formation is, and then answer the when, the where, the why, the what, and the how. So again, it's not enough just to say a series of numbers that add up to 11. You now have to account for why you choose to do that, and then really discuss in depth how that deployment of players becomes part of your system and why you have chosen that system.
Well, thank you, Ian, for your time and presentation for this introduction. We hope we have whet the appetite of the audience and that you will now proceed on to watch the 4 formation presentations and finally the review session that looks at these 4 formations in an imposed environment. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, sir.